Okay, let's just dive right into this. For over a year now, OpenAI's growth has looked, well, absolutely unstoppable. But today, we're looking at an unconfirmed report published by the industry tracker OpenTools back on May 4th, 2026, which claims that OpenAI is actually missing its growth targets. Now, if that's true, it fundamentally changes the calculus for anyone building on their platform. Quick disclaimer up front. This explainer is strictly for education and analysis, not financial advice. We're going to break down exactly what this report says, and more importantly, what it means for the future of the AI market. Here is our roadmap for today's breakdown: the allegation, competitive pressure, capital impact, a quick risk check, an operator action plan, and finally, the final judgment.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the OpenTools allegation itself.
So what exactly are they saying? According to this OpenTools report, OpenAI supposedly missed its aggressive internal revenue targets for the most recent quarter. On top of that, they're alleging that monthly active user growth for ChatGPT is really starting to slow down. Now, we need to be crystal clear here, guys. These are entirely unverified, third-party estimates from a tracker. These are not official numbers from a financial outlet or from OpenAI.
But think about it. If this data is even partially accurate, it represents the very first real headwind for the undisputed king of generative AI. It's the first major crack in the armor, signaling that the AI race is tightening up way faster than anyone expected.
That brings us to Section 2, rising competitive pressure.
Look, the simplest explanation for any potential slowdown is just that OpenAI isn't operating in a one-horse race anymore. Just in the last 6 months, Anthropic dropped Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is insanely fast, powerful, and very competitive on price. Meanwhile, Google has really hit its stride with Gemini 1.5 Pro, offering this massive context window that just unlocks totally new enterprise use cases. So OpenAI's flagship GPT-4o is suddenly facing relentless, top-tier competition. Let's put on our skeptical analyst hat for a second and look at this purely analytically. The reality of the enterprise market isn't about which model is objectively the smartest on some AI leaderboard. For a business, good enough is usually the real winner, especially if it costs half as much or if it seamlessly integrates right into the cloud provider they're already paying for.
And staying with that skeptical analyst view, this really highlights the ultimate fear in enterprise tech: vendor lock-in. Companies are actively testing Anthropic and Google models right now, specifically because they absolutely do not want to be totally dependent on OpenAI. That deliberate diversification, that is a direct, measurable threat to a market leader's bottom line.
All right, zooming back out to the big picture, let's hit Section 3, the market and capital impact.
If this multipolar trend holds, the flow of capital is going to shift dramatically. The immediate winners are obviously the competing labs, Anthropic and Google, scooping up those enterprise dollars. The infrastructure winners are the big cloud providers like AWS and Google Cloud. And the guys feeling the squeeze? OpenAI, for sure, but also Microsoft as their key partner. And you know, this is exactly why infrastructure providers are probably grinning right now. Cloud platforms like AWS thrive in a multimodal world. They just want to be the neutral ground. They honestly don't care if you use OpenAI, Anthropic, or open source, just as long as you're buying their compute infrastructure to run the whole shebang.
Notice how this alleged slowdown shifts the entire industry narrative. For OpenAI, the vibe goes from inevitable monopoly to simply being the market leader in a crowded, competitive field. And for Microsoft, who staked so heavily on this deep, exclusive partnership, well, an OpenAI slowdown means their strategy looks less like a definitive kingmaker bet and more like just one of several bets they need to manage.
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's jump to Section 4 for a highly necessary risk check. Let's get that skeptical analyst mindset back out, because we absolutely have to ground this in facts. The OpenTools report remains completely unverified. Their methodology for estimating OpenAI's private financials and user metrics is totally unclear. It's essentially a black box. Plus, OpenAI has offered zero official comment confirming or denying these numbers.
So there are massive reasons for skepticism here. First, OpenTools is an industry tracker, not the Wall Street Journal. Second, even if there is a dip, it could easily just be seasonal. And frankly, maintaining 100% explosive month-over-month growth forever is just mathematically impossible. We really need to treat this report as a single smoke signal, not a definitive five-alarm fire.
Back to the main desk. Let's move to Section 5 and talk about what you should actually do about this, with an operator action plan.
Whether this report is perfectly accurate or entirely off base, it is a huge wake-up call that relying on a single provider is a massive strategic risk.
Starting Monday morning, you need a clear 3-step plan to de-risk your AI stack. Benchmark your models, explore API routers, and track pricing.
First up, benchmarking. A simple test makes this reality incredibly obvious. Take a common task, say, summarizing a transcript. Run it through GPT-4o, Claude 3.5, and Gemini 1.5. You might just find that for your specific use case, you can get 95% of the quality of GPT-4o for literally half the cost using a competitor.
Second, and I literally cannot stress this enough, do not hard code specific models like GPT-4o into your apps. You need to explore open source or managed API routers, things like LiteLLM, Martian, or Portkey.ai. These give you a unified interface so you can swap between over 100 different language models with just a single line of code. It's a total game changer.
The big takeaway here is to build resilient systems that are totally independent of a single provider. For example, I actually use these exact multi-model principles to build a financial dashboard for my side hustle command center. It uses AI for the heavy lifting, sure, but the architecture itself isn't locked to OpenAI or anyone else. Building your tools to be platform agnostic makes you inherently more resilient.
Let's wrap things up with Section 6, the final judgment. What this unconfirmed report ultimately does is validate a thesis that so many of us have suspected. The market is undeniably shifting into a multipolar competition. OpenAI absolutely remains the leader, but they are now surrounded by Anthropic, Google, and a rapidly advancing open source community. They're going to have to fight tooth and nail to maintain their share going forward.
So, as we move forward, there is a single watchlist metric you need to be tracking: API price cuts from OpenAI. If you want undeniable proof that competitive pressure from Anthropic and Google is actually hurting OpenAI's bottom line, just watch their pricing page. A massive price cut in the next quarter? That's the ultimate admission that this multipolar war is taking a toll. And that leads me to my final question for you today. Think about everything we just covered. Does this report, as unconfirmed as it is, change your view on the inevitability of OpenAI's total dominance? Or do you think the competition is still just too far behind to really matter in your day-to-day work? It's a fascinating question, and I highly encourage you to structure your own AI workflows to survive and thrive no matter who ends up winning. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today.